this video, we're going to talk about pulses and drones and the Matriarch's VCA modes, but as usual, I ended up going into a lot of detail about all kinds of different things and went way longer than I planned. So I'm going to split this into a couple of videos again, and I'll do a few more videos about VCA modes and some patch ideas in the next couple of weeks. So in this one, you're already listening to the patch we're going to put together. I do go through some pretty basic stuff in the beginning, but it gets complicated fast. So another reason to split up the videos, don't want any synth burnout. Anyway, there's an index in the description, as well as links to patch diagrams. Let's get to it. Alright, let's take a quick look at the Matriarch's audio path and CV routing for envelopes, filters, and VCAs. The audio path for the Matriarch doesn't really change unless you change it by patching, which you'll probably do, but everything is internally routed or normaled for easy operation. The oscillators are all routed to a mono mixer. The output of the mixer is split and sent to both filters. I just said routing doesn't change, but it does depending on the filter mode you're in. A while back I did a series of videos about the filter and showed how the routing will change based on filter modes. Check those out if you want. But for this video, we'll be using the filter in stereo mode, which is dual mono low-pass resonant filters. The output of each filter is sent to a VCA. I'm sure you already know this, but VCA stands for a voltage-controlled amplifier, so it's responsible for volume, or amplitude. The output of each VCA is sent to a dual mono or stereo delay. It's important to remember that the delay comes after the VCA. If you think about it, of course it does. If it didn't, the delay would just be constantly running. There would be no articulation, it'd just be big wash. But that can be confusing if you're new to synths because the delay module on the Matriarch is to the left of the VCAs. Anyway, that's the basic audio path. Okay, there are 3 different modes for the VCAs. Although modes don't just affect the VCAs, as you'll see. The most commonly used is amp envelope mode. In amp envelope mode, the filter envelope generator modulates both of the filters. The amount, of course, can be controlled by the envelope amount knob on the filter section. I actually talked a lot about that in the DFAM video I just did. Don't want to keep plugging my videos, but not really going to go into more detail about that knob for now, so it might be worth watching that video. Anyway, the amp envelope generator modulates both VCAs. That's all there is to it. If we switch over to split mode, things get a bit more complicated. The filter envelope still modulates both filters, but it's doing double duty. It also modulates VCA1. The amp envelope generator then only modulates VCA2. The most obvious use for this is for stereo patches, changing up volume on left and right channels, etc. Lastly, we have drone mode. In drone mode, the VCAs are wide open. Filter envelope generator still modulates the filters, but amp envelope generator is disconnected and doesn't modulate anything, which of course leaves it free to be used to modulate whatever you want. Okay, let's put that to the test and try it out. I'm in amp envelope mode, so we'll use the amp envelope generator to modulate the volume. Easy peasy. And our filter envelope generator obviously modulates the filter. But unlike the VCAs, we have an attenuverter to control the amount of modulation. Yep, no surprises there. This is synth basics. I'm sure you all understand that. So let's move on. Okay, let's set up a patch. I'm going to start with the oscillators. I'm going to offset the octaves. I'm going to go 16, 4, 8, 4. And I'll offset the pitch of oscillators 2 and 4 by 1/5 and set them all to pulse waves. And let's set up the filter, put it to around 1 o'clock. Add a little bit of resonance, I'm going to make it equal, I guess, just to roll off a little bit of the lows and give a little bit of a squelch. Oh, we're in unison mode, by the way. And I've got all oscillators turned to around 10 o'clock on the mixer, just on the verge of saturation. Okay, so this patch is going to be a drone with a repeating pulse. To get our pulse, we're going to loop or cycle the amp envelope generator, which essentially turns the envelope generator into a unipolar LFO. To do this, all we need to do is patch the end of envelope out to the trigger input. And there's our pulse. When the envelope generator is looping like this, the sustain and decay will have no effect for the loop. But if you held a key, it's still going to work. Okay, we should do a quick review of VCA modulation. VCAs only react to positive voltage. As I apply a positive offset, the VCA opens. Negative, nothing happens. Makes sense. VCAs are typically used to control the volume of audio or constrain the amount of a CV signal. You can't have negative volume, just zero. You can have negative voltages, so in cases that you need that, you wouldn't use a VCA, you'd want to use an attenuverter. Anyway, stay on target. Don't want this to be another hour-long video. Okay, so envelope generators are unipolar, only positive voltage with a 0 volt low point. If we cycle an envelope generator, like I said, it essentially becomes a unipolar LFO with wave shape dependent upon the attack and release values. Perfect for modulating a VCA because a bipolar LFO does not cross into negative voltages, so we don't have any dead spots. Let me show you what I mean by dead spots. If we modulate a VCA with a bipolar LFO, both positive and negative voltages, the VCA can't do anything with the negative voltage. The VCA is already at 0, can't turn the volume down any further, so while the voltage is in the negative range, we get dead spots. Dead spots might not necessarily be bad. You may want a long pause between notes. Depending on the LFO shape, could be really cool. You could end up generating some interesting rhythms, for instance. But most of the time, we want to modulate a VCA with a unipolar LFO. It's just easier to dial in the modulation you'd expect. Going even further off topic, if you don't have a unipolar LFO, or have used them all up for something else, you can use a full wave rectifier to turn bipolar waves to unipolar. But we'll save that for another video. Okay, back to our patch. Let's get the amp envelope generator looping again, and I'll plug that into the scope. And we're going to get the filter envelope looping as well, and might as well plug that in the scope as well. Okay, one of the cool things about this patch is the LFOs are not in sync, so you can hear it trigger and the filter swell in and out. Cool. I'm going to switch to drone mode so we can hear the filter modulation clearly. So depending on where you've set your filter cutoff, by the way, a filter does respond to bipolar CV, of course, but our filter envelope, again, is unipolar. So what I'm going to do is find the low point of the cutoff that I like, and the filter will be modulated above that point. Sounds pretty good in the middle. And if the cutoff's too high, there's really not much room for modulation. I think a good place to start is right in the middle. Okay, I think that sounds pretty good, but I've already got the scope set up, so I might as well show you a bipolar LFO. Again, if we used a bipolar LFO, we'd get both positive and negative modulation of the filter with the cutoff point at the 0 crossing. So with the cutoff in the center, with the bipolar LFO, we'll get a full sweep of the filter. I'll unplug the modulation so we can hear the cutoff point. And if the cutoff is set a lot higher or lower than the center position, we're going to get some kind of cool lopsided modulation. Okay, that was a tangent. Supposed to be talking about drones in VCA modes, not bipolar filter modulation. Oh well, let's get back to our patch and get the filter envelope modulating the filter again. Okay, we've got our VCA and filter modulation going. Next step, I guess, would be to work a bit more on the tone, so let's get some pulse width modulation in there. Just using the sine wave from the mod bus, and using the mod wheel and the pulse width amount in the mod bay to dial in the max amount of modulation. I want it to be subtle, and I want it to change quite often. So if we want things to change, we need to modulate them. So I'm going to use the filter envelope generator to modulate the rate of this LFO. And I want to keep my attenuverters open, so I'm going to use Splix Passive Attenuator by Board Brain Music. Use these all the time. So that's patched directly into the rate input of the mod bay. So now as the filter envelope rises, the rate of the pulse width modulation will increase. Cool. And now the real secret to the patch, the delay. Okay, so I think I'm going to turn the mix up about halfway. And I want the delay to be in time, probably 1/8 notes. Oh, and it's already there. That was lucky. If it wasn't, I'd just adjust the delay time until I got a rhythm I like. Now let's add in feedback. And I want the delay tails to taper off just before the next pulse. That sounds good. And lastly, let's add in the ping pong. Cool, so that's this patch. I'm just going to play a little tune and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, I just realized that I had both my inputs centered while recording that last bit, so I wasn't getting a really nice ping-pong delay. Let's listen to the delay tails. This is what it should have sounded like. Okay, here's a bit of a tangent, nothing to do with the VCA. Well, that's not entirely true, I guess. It does have to do with VCA routing, so it's not a tangent. Anyway, what if we wanted to filter the delay? Okay, here's the basic audio signal path again. If we want to filter the delay, we'll need one channel for the dry synth voice and one channel for the wet filtered delay. So we'll have a patch with the synth in mono and the delay in mono because we only have two filters, VCAs and outputs. We can pan each side if we want in a DAW or mixer, but we'll worry about that later. So our dry signal needs to be split after the VCA, with one copy being sent directly to the outputs and another going into one of the delay channels. The delay, which should be fully wet, needs to be sent to the filter, but it needs to bypass the VCA and delay on that channel and be sent directly to the outputs. Let's not worry about the filter envelope, modulation, and VC envelope patching yet. There's a whole bunch of weird internal patching, normal connection behaviors on the Matriarch. Some we'll talk about in this video. In fact, we're going to see one in a minute. So we'll come back to filter and amp patching. So the easiest way to do this is patch delay channel 1 out from the back of the Matriarch to a filter input. Good news is the delay outputs on the back of the Matriarch are fully wet, so we've already solved one of our issues. We'll use filter 1 to modulate the delay. And then we're going to patch out of the Eurorack output of channel 2, which remember is our dry signal that we want to send to the delay. And we'll patch into delay channel 1 input. The Eurorack outs are just copies of the 1/4 inch outs on the Matriarch, or the instrument outs. So they're after the delay. So we still need to figure out how to bypass the delay, and guess what? That's super easy. Just turn the delay mix to 0. Delay bypassed. Done. The Matriarch's internal routing will take care of routing the filter outputs to the appropriate VCA, so we don't need to patch those. And even though we have our delay signal patch in the VCF channel 1, the magic of the Matriarch's internal routing saves us again. The mixer out will be sent to VCF channel 2, but not to channel 1, because it's already patched. There's no need to patch the mixer output to channel 2 of the mixer, which is something I discovered accidentally, so we don't need any more patches and can keep the spaghetti to a minimum. Okay, let's get our looping envelope going again and see if this worked. Okay, the good news is it's sort of working, but you can probably hear that the delay tails are being cut. That's because we haven't bypassed the VCA on that channel. Turning up the feedback will have no effect. But we do get some nice saturation. Could be used in another patch, but not what we want. Oh, that was really nice. Anyway, the problem is the amp envelope is still modulating VCA1, our delay channel, so let's try to solve this by patching a DC offset from an attenuator to the VCA CV input. Well, that didn't work. It got louder, but the offset didn't hold open the VCA like you'd expect, so we found another of Matriarch's peculiarities. So, even with a CV signal patched into the VCA CV inputs, the normal connection from the amp envelope generator is not broken. That's a bit of a drag for this patch, but it does mean that you can modulate the VCAs, say with an LFO, and still keep the envelope modulation. That's undoubtedly why they did that, and it's actually pretty useful. It's also a bit of a drag that the Matriarch's VCAs don't have an offset like most other synths and modules, but I guess it can't have everything. And good news is, there's an easy enough fix. We'll just flip it over to drone mode and open up both VCAs. Well, that sounds pretty cool. We can hear the filter modulation a lot clearer. It's a nice drone, and we'll be talking about drones a little later in the video, but it's not what we want. So you guessed it, if we're in drone mode, all we need to do is patch the amp envelope out to the VCA CV input 2, and our patch is complete. That's cool, but I guess the patch isn't totally complete. We still need to work out the filter modulation. At the moment, both wet and dry signals are being modulated the same amount, so let's turn off filter modulation by centering the envelope amount knob. And I'm going to molt the filter envelope and keep our pulse width modulation going. And I'm going to patch a dead patch into the CV input for the cutoff for filter 2. We need a dead patch because whatever you plug into filter 1 will also affect filter 2. So I'm out of the molt into filter 1 CV input. So the filter envelope is now only modulating the filter on the delay channel. And to make this easier to hear, let's just solo our delay in the DAW. Okay, that's better. You can hear it clear, so let's just do some tinkering. The spacing knob controls the cutoff of filter 1 relative to filter 2. And remember, the envelope modulation is unipolar, so we won't get any negative modulation. So I'll use the spacing knob to find the lowest cutoff value I want for my filter modulation. And why not add a little resonance? Okay, that sounds great. But now we have another issue. The dry signal has no filter modulation and is already pretty dark. So the delay is going to be dark too, and even more so because we're using a Matriarch and the delay is really dark to begin with. But first, let's unsolo the delay and hear the patch as it is. Okay, I'm just going to use a molt cable in case I want to use the molt on the Matriarch for something else. So I'm molting the amp envelope output and patching back into the VCA, and then I'll patch the other end of the molt cable into an attenuator and take the dead patch, which is modulating filter 2, into the attenuator output. And now our amp envelope is modulating filter 2. Yeah, now we're cooking with gas. Okay, let's solo the pulse and do some tinkering. Okay, so again, this attenuator controls the filter modulation for the pulse. Just try to find a sweet spot. That's pretty good. Okay, again, we're going to solo the delay. And just do a little more tinkering with the spacing knob until we find something I like. I think the resonance is cutting a little too much at the lows. Maybe we want to bring that down a bit. And maybe make some changes to my LFO speed, just speed it up a little bit. I still want a sort of a triangle shape, so I'm going to keep attack and release about the same. Yeah, that sounds good. But if I want this to be a little more retro sounding, it should probably be in mono. Although hard panning wet and dry is a trick they used a lot in production in the 70s, but let's go for a real old school and make it mono, or at least decrease the width. Okay, that's a pretty sweet sounding patch. I like the retro vibe, but let's go a step further. What if we wanted our pulse to not totally disappear between the notes? Easy with most VCAs, just add an offset, but there's no offset on Matriarch's VCAs. It turns out it's not nearly as complicated as you'd think. I actually tried this last week and came up with something that worked, but was overly complicated. I'll post a patch diagram of my first attempt on my website, but let's stick with the streamlined and easy version. So all we need to do is patch our drone or VCF2 output to an attenuator. The attenuator is going to be acting as a VCA. If you watched any of my other videos, you'll know I do this a lot in tons of different patches. Then all we need to do is take the output of the attenuator and patch it into VCA2's input, which is really just a way to get it to the outputs on the back of the synth. That VCA is not going to be doing anything. And then out of our amp envelope into the CV control input for our attenuator. If the attenuator is not totally centered, you'll hear some bleed. Well, bleed is what we want, so it's working, but it does work as a VCA if it's totally centered. Okay, I'm going to solo the pulse so we can clearly hear what we're doing and bring in the offset. Cool. Now we've got a drone with an attack, or our AR envelope is kind of acting like an ADSR with a long sustain. Anyway, sounds great to me. Yeah, I really like this patch. I think it sounds amazing. Okay, but let's hear what it sounds like in stereo. Okay, this is my new favorite patch. Love it. And I'm just going to cheat. It's not really cheating. I'm just going to adjust the levels in the DAW, bring the delay up a little more. That sounds good. Okay, this patch is good to go, but let's mess around with some effects. I almost never talk about effects in my videos because I want these patches to be easily duplicated. I think it's sort of cheating using hardware or plugins that not everybody has access to in a demo, but the mono version of this patch is just screaming for a little help. Okay, so I've got both right and left channels centered again, so we're back in mono with our retro vintage sound. But I want to try to replicate the PingPong Delay effect we had going with the Matriarch earlier. So I'm going to use this cool panner plugin from SoftTube. It's modeled after the Ditronics Cyclosonic panner. The name alone makes you want to use it, but any panner will do, even the basic one in your DAW. I'm using this one because it has a trigger input. Basically, it's just an envelope follower that triggers the panner when the input meets a user-determined threshold. Cool. So I'm not even going to go into cyclosonic mode. I'm just going to pan left and right. I want to try to keep it as vintage retro sounding as I can. So let's hear how this thing sounds. everything sounds great. I've got the width set about 50%, so it's nice, subtle panning. Just some ear candy for people on headphones. Okay, next up we're going to add some reverb, add some space. This isn't a vintage sound, but I can't resist Eventide's Black Hole. Yeah, that sounds great. And it kind of sounds like an 80s digital reverb, so that's okay. Alright, last but not least, we're going to add some modulation. Instead of chorus, I'm going to use this flanger, something that's overlooked, I think, these days. Yeah, that is super cool. That's an awesome flange plugin. Okay, that does it for this patch. I'm just going to jam out for a little bit.